Colman by Monica Furlong, Chapter 12. It was now 2 days to the feast. Perched in our strange little eyrie, Wise Child and I watched the preparations begin in the hall below. We saw footmen, including Cormac, place fresh candles in the sconces and give the tables another scrubbing. They laid each place with its knife and its tankard for beer or wine. We thought, but this may just have been our hunger, which was barely appeased by the scraps Cormac was able to bring us, that we could smell the roasting of meat, the swans, wild fowl, boar, and oxen, with which Prince Brangwen's birthday was to be celebrated. Once the prince himself entered the hall, accompanied by the Grey Knight, and we craned our necks to try to gauge his expression. "He looks sad," Wise Child said at last, and I agreed with her. We wondered what explanation he had been given for our disappearance. That Marut had conducted a search for us throughout the castle, we knew very well. On the morning after Cormac had spirited us away from our cell, we had heard shouting, the moving of furniture, and the tramp of many booted feet overhead. We guessed, rightly, that the soldiers were searching for us room by room. We trembled in our little chamber under Cormac's floor, and when we heard the boots directly above us, we clutched each other in terror, Wise Child uncharacteristically hiding her face in my shoulder. I could feel her shaking with fear. But then, to our huge relief, the sound of the feet retreated, and we both breathed again. "We've done it," I said triumphantly. We did not discuss the fact that we had no idea how we would ever escape from Cormac's room, nor what the outcome of all our efforts, Finbars, Junipers, Unis, could possibly be. It was enough to live day by day, moment by moment. There was another frightening episode when we saw a number of men, all footmen, lined up below us in the hall. "Look," said Wise Child, "there's Cormac." We soon realized what the purpose was. 2 soldiers, whom we recognized as the guards who had stopped us the night before, walked slowly along the line of men. "They're trying to identify Cormac," Wise Child said in dread. The soldiers walked up and down, peering closely into men's faces, but we were thankful to see that they barely glanced at Cormac and had no idea he was their quarry. "Thank God for that," I breathed when they passed him for the 3rd time. He came to see us later. He had brought us more cushions and blankets, food and drink, and news of what was going on in the castle. "Marut is said to be furious, but she is keeping to her room," he told us. "She is issuing all kinds of threats to the soldiers about what she will do to them if they do not find you, so they are searching frantically in every nook and cranny of the castle." "I wouldn't want to be in their shoes," said Wise Child with feeling. "Tomorrow the guests start to arrive," Cormac told us. "There will be dinner tomorrow night, with songs and storytellers to keep the first guests happy. Then the birthday proper begins the next day. In the afternoon will be the horse race. The morning after will be the crowning of the prince as Regulus. This is Marut's excuse for not letting the prince ride in the race himself. She says he might be injured. Then directly after the crowning comes the feast, which will go on for several days." He paused. "It is rather puzzling," he went on. "Sometimes the prince talks as if I am to ride Golden in the race, sometimes as if he is going to. I wonder if he is quite right in his mind." Wise Child and I exchanged glances and came to a wordless agreement. Swiftly, Wise Child told him of the suggestion she had made to the prince, the deception it would involve in using the cloth of disguise, and the idea that the prince should escape and return to Castle Door. For a while, as the cloth works, it will appear that you are the prince, and the prince, who will be riding golden, is you. How long will the disguise work for? Cormac asked. Until the prince discards his part of the cloth, Wise Child said, which means when he gets near to Castle Door and needs the people to recognize him. On a fast horse like Golden, he should be there during the evening of the crowning day, when everyone is sitting at the feast. What it means, Cormac, is that you will be Prince Brangwyn both at the crowning and at the birthday feast. Maybe you should make an excuse as it gets late and leave the great hall before you change back into being Cormac. Though it will seem odd if you leave your own feast before the end. She added thoughtfully, that apart, won't the prince's groom wonder about what became of Golden after the race? Cormac said, I heard the prince tell them that tonight and tomorrow night he will stable him himself in Merut's stable, as he may need special care after the race, and he and I can keep an eye on him there. The prince's groom does not go there. As Wise Child explained this, it occurred to me that Cormac might be very angry, feeling that we had used him as a tool and put him in danger without ever asking his consent. It was a measure of Cormac's goodness and his love for Wise Child that he seemed to not mind at all, though he did have some worries. It's wonderful, he said, to think of the prince returning to Castle Door, and I am so pleased I can help him. But I have no idea how a prince should behave, especially at a crowning. It is terrifying. Suppose I give the game away? People see what they expect to see, Wise Child said sagely. Almost anything you do will seem all right to them. Just look confident, pleased with yourself. Will they be expecting the prince when he gets to Castle Door? Cormac went on to ask. Uni says that they will, that a message will reach them, and Finbar will arm the men. Then they will march on Caerleon. Cormac frowned. Do you think those sad men can hold their own here? I don't know, said Wise Child honestly. They will at least be helped by the magic of 3 Dorans, Uni, Juniper, and me. But Uni thinks Finbar may have other plans up his sleeve. Juniper, said Cormac in surprise. Juniper is coming here? So Uni says, and she always knows everything. We could see that Cormac found this a comforting thought. Have you seen Uni this morning? I asked him. I keep worrying that Merut will think our disappearance is her doing. I haven't seen her, but I suspect Uni can look after herself. As if our question had prompted her appearance, a little later we observed Uni down below, ordering and scolding in her most high-handed fashion as she supervised the laying of fresh rushes on the floor and bunches of sweet-smelling herbs on the table where Merut and the Grey Knight would sit with the grander guests. The high table stood on a raised platform, and 2 large carved chairs, looking rather like thrones, were placed in the middle. To the right of the larger chair was another carved chair, which I assumed was intended for the prince. Apart from our observations of the flurries of activity down below, time passed slowly in our hiding place. We were much more comfortable than we had been in the dungeon, and Cormac fed us as well as he could with odd legs of chicken and hunks of bread he had managed to steal in the course of his duties. Yet our uncertainties about what was to come, and what our own part in the events was likely to be, kept us anxious. And what with that and the lack of exercise, we both slept badly. We discussed with Cormac whether it was worth taking the risk of spending time in his room rather than in our hiding place, but we both feared Marut might order another search at any moment, and that we might get taken unawares. "I cannot see how we can ever get out of here," Wise Child said gloomily at one point. "Marut, or the soldiers, have only to recognize us, and we're done for." I could not think of anything reassuring to say in reply. We spent hours trying to work out what might be happening back at Castle Door. Had Finbar armed the men yet? And where was Juniper? That second night in our eyrie, we were entertained by the arrival of the first guests, who were to be given a modest dinner in the hall. "Look," said Wise Child, "there is a blind harpist. That must be Eric." Eric was being guided by a handsome boy, and close behind him was another boy, identical in size and appearance. Also with the party was a woman wearing a wimple and a scarlet gown. Eric tuned his harp and practiced a little, the boys and the woman sitting beside him. Other entertainers were also practicing, a juggler, a conjurer, and an acrobat, who did a number of astonishing somersaults between the tables. By the time the diners arrived, about 20 in all, Eric was playing. He played some quiet music as the diners took their seats and began to eat. Then Eric played the introduction to a song, and the woman with the scarlet dress stood up and began to sing an old Cornish ballad. I felt Wise Child grow tense beside me. "It's Juniper," she gasped. I stared hard at the woman, who seemed to me to bear little resemblance to Juniper. "I'd know that voice anywhere," Wise Child said. "She doesn't look much, if at all, like Juniper," I said doubtfully. "You are used to seeing her with her hair loose. In any case, she must have used magic to make herself less recognizable." I stared hard at the singer. Was she Juniper? I was far from sure. "It's her voice, I tell you," said Wise Child obstinately. "I would know it anywhere." The scent of the hot meat was very tempting to Wise Child and me, with nothing but bread and a little cold chicken to dine on. Prince Brangwyn, Marut, and the Grey Knight arrived and took their places at table. If Marut had looked ill when we had last seen her in the workroom, she now looked ghastly. She tottered as she walked, even with the help of the knight on one side and her snake stick on the other. Her face had a yellow tinge, and her eyes seemed sunken and dead within her face. Once I saw her clutch her side as if in mortal pain. Uni walked a pace or two behind her, and I saw her take her place behind her chair. Once, when Marut half turned to her, Uni handed her a bottle, which Marut smelled. Prince Brangwyn, beautifully dressed in silk and linen, had a moody look on his face, as if the last place he wanted to be was here. He ate listlessly and drank, I noticed, not at all. This made me think that he did intend to race Golden the next day. He did not look like a man who was soon to celebrate his birthday. At one point, however, he spotted Eric, leaped up from the table, and went to speak to him. And for the first time his face became animated. Marut's eyes followed him, plainly suspicious. In addition to the party at the high table, we were fascinated by the other guests. Nearly all of them were men, and only one or two ladies among them. The wives, we guessed, of some of the more important reguli and chieftains. Eric played throughout the meal, and the juggler amused the guests with astonishing feats with balls, and later with knives and forks. At one point, the woman with the scarlet dress sang again, a French song this time. Once again, Wise Child became rigid. "How I wish I could talk to her," Wise Child moaned. "It's awful to be so near to her." I was still not sure that it was Juniper we were watching. We both kept our eyes on Marut, knowing how dangerous it would be if she recognized her. But her eyes passed casually over the singer and back again to the food she was scarcely bothering to eat. The guests ate a delicious-looking syllabub. "Oh, the cream," moaned Wise Child. Both of us slept very little that night. Early in the morning, the servants were back, scrubbing the tables and making sure that all was in order. I imagined the frenzy in the kitchens as the cooks labored ceaselessly at the spits, knowing well how unforgiving Marut would be if anything went wrong. We were in agony that day, thinking of the moment when, we hoped, Prince Brangwyn, disguised as Cormac, would mount Golden and gallop away, not to win the race, but to find his way back to Castle Door. We would know that this had happened because Cormac, looking like the prince, would return to the room when he had the opportunity. The day wore on, and there was no sign of Cormac. We speculated about what could have happened. Maybe the prince, never very sure about the use of the cloth of disguise, and perhaps fearful of the outcome of using it, had decided to let Cormac race on Golden after all. Maybe the cloth had not worked. The prince had been stopped, and both he and Cormac were in trouble with Marut. Maybe, the most terrible possibility of all, intimidated by the disappearance of Wise Child and myself, the prince had confessed all to Marut. "Well, I don't believe that one," Wise Child said stoutly. "Despite all that has happened to him, the prince strikes me as a brave man. He is Juniper's brother, after all." She could not think of a better recommendation than that. We clutched each other as we heard the door of Cormac's room above us open and close. And a few moments later we were looking up into the face of Prince Brangwyn. Although we had half expected this transformation, it was still a weird surprise. "What happened?" we breathed, trying to remember that it was Cormac we were talking to. "We expected you before this." "The cloth of disguise worked perfectly," Cormac told us, in Prince Brangwyn's voice. He lowered himself into our hiding place. I was wearing the colored suit that carries the prince's emblem. He was dressed as usual, well, as I am now. He used the cloth, and that was it. He had become me. I could tell from looking down that I had become him, but it was not until I looked at my reflection in the stable pond that I really believed it. I accompanied him to the field, gave him a leg up, as the prince always does for me, and watched the start of the race. Then I noticed Marut eyeing me. To my horror, she came over and asked me to accompany her to her private apartment. I stood still until Golden had disappeared from view, and then I could think of no excuse not to do as she asked. Of course, my fear was that my Cornish could never be mistaken for that of the prince. I started by merely grunting responses to what she said. She did not seem surprised, so I guess she was used to the prince being surly with her. Finally, she asked me a direct question, and I felt that at any moment I would be unmasked. Then, to my astonishment and delight, as I framed the words in my broken Cornish, they corrected themselves in my mouth and came out fluently, in that beautiful, confident way that the prince speaks. It was odd, but I felt as if I really was the prince. "I wonder if he feels he is you," Wise Child said. "Won't it feel odd to change back to your real selves?" "That is the tricky bit," Cormac answered. "I don't like the feeling that, as I return to being me, I shall get caught sitting at Marut's high table. Quite apart from the terrors of the crowning tomorrow, I was not brought up to the high life. Though I have told the prince," he said evenly, "that he is not to think of that. He must discard the cloth whenever he needs to, and I will deal with what happens as best I can. It is vitally important that he discloses himself to his people as soon as possible." "It is a huge risk for you to run," said Wise Child. "Why not just stay away from the feast? Pretend you are ill." "Do you think Marut would allow that when I am the guest of honor? In any case, she has plans that I shall never leave her side all day tomorrow. No, I must see it through. If I disappear, she might get suspicious. She must not have any idea that Prince Brangwen has returned home." "You are a brave man," I said. "I hope so," said Cormac. "I do not mind too much what happens, if we can free the people of Castle Dor from their submission to Caerleon. It is also perfectly possible that Prince Brangwen will not reach Castle Dor until much later, by which time I shall have made my excuses and gone to bed." "What's it like being someone else?" Wise Child asked curiously. Cormac hesitated. "It's not just being somebody else," he said finally. "It is somebody else who is handsome, as well as young. It makes a difference to have a face that people admire, rather than one that alarms them or arouses their curiosity." Wise Child looked at him with the loving sympathy of which she was so capable. "I hadn't thought of that," she said. "That must be hard." "It will be hard," Cormac said, "when I revert to being myself again. At present, it is rather exciting." He did not stay long with us. He needed to get back to Prince Brangwen's apartment before he was missed. We thought it unlikely we would talk to him again before the birthday feast. That night, Prince Brangwen took his place with Grace in the great hall. Eric and the Juniper Lady, as we called her, played and sang an old French song. "She used to sing that to me in the White House," Wise Child exclaimed in excitement. The acrobats and conjurer amused the guests, and once again we watched and envied them their lovely food. Eric, we noticed, was accompanied now by only one of the beautiful twins. "I've been thinking," I said to Wise Child. "Sooner or later, we have got to get out of this place, particularly if, God forbid, anything awful happens to Cormac. I cannot begin to think how we can do it safely. Even if the castle is attacked by Finbar and the others, it will still not be safe for us to emerge. A siege could go on for weeks, and if Cormac is discovered, we will have nothing to eat." "I know," Wise Child said. "Apart from the Silver Crescent, we still have one of the protections, the Black Egg. I suppose we might use it to make our escape, but it would be awfully difficult to do." We were silent for a long while after that. "Well," said Wise Child at last, "at least at the moment we are not in that awful prison cell or being threatened with torture by Marut. We just have to live with what is going on at the moment and not think too far ahead. The future is too frightening. That day and night, with no visit from Cormac, seemed interminable. In the morning of the next day, his 18th birthday, Prince Brangwyn was to be proclaimed the official Regulus of Cornwall, a horrible mockery for one who had no power at all and was not even allowed to go out without guards. At least the real prince is spared that, I said. After a time we could hear shouting in the distance, and guessed that it was the traditional hailing of the new king by his neighbors. "Hail King Brangwyn," Wise Child said ironically. At last the long afternoon crawled to a close, and the great hall began to fill again with the guests who had attended the crowning. All of them stood as the false King Brangwyn, wearing the small golden crown of the Regulus that had belonged to King Mark, entered with Marut and the Grey Knight. There was a round of applause from the guests, a shouting of the word "Hail," and then there was special music sung by boys praising the new king's excellent qualities. As at the previous feast, Uni took up her station behind Marut, who once again looked desperately ill. Soon a very grand feast began to be served, with servants carrying in huge platters of boar and swan. "Look," said Wise Child, "do you notice how the Juniper Lady keeps eyeing Cormac? She knows that there is something different about him. It must be Juniper." "Juniper has scarcely seen her brother since he was a baby. How would she know if he was different?" "I have no idea, but it wouldn't surprise me if she did." "Do you notice only one of the twins is here again?" I pointed out. And then it happened. Marut was leaning to her right, listening to the new king, when suddenly she turned and glanced at him. I do not know whether he had suddenly started to talk in broken Cornish, or whether his speech became hard to understand, as it often did. Whatever it was, as she stared, he began to change before her, and our eyes. One moment he looked like both Brangwyn and Cormac simultaneously. It was the oddest thing. And then, quite swiftly and unmistakably, he was Cormac again. Cormac and Marut eyed each other in a kind of mutual terror. Marut's eyes seemed to bulge for a moment, and her face became ashen. And then suddenly she stood up, clutched herself, and fell forward across the table. The whole hall became silent. Everyone stopped eating and stared in shock at the fallen body of Marut. Cormac, quick as thought, slipped out of his chair and stood behind Marut's, beside Uni, as if he were a servant. Uni bent over Marut, then said some words to the Grey Knight. The Grey Knight signaled to Cormac, just as if he had been there all along, to carry Marut out of the hall. Grand people scarcely notice their servants. They are simply there for their convenience, which made things safer for Cormac. He followed, and Uni followed him. Awkward, embarrassed by what had happened, the guests sat silent, not liking to eat. Nobody seemed to notice the fact that the young king had disappeared. "Now what?" I said. As if in answer to my question, Uni returned to the hall. She made a brief speech on behalf of her mistress, telling the guests that she had been taken ill, that she was attended by the Grey Knight and King Brangwyn, but that she wished them to continue to enjoy themselves. Glancing at one another, the guests slowly took up their knives, and a hubbub of talk broke out.